Without my son, you are nothing. Richard Whitmore said it like he was signing a check, calm, clean, and cruel enough to make every fork in the dining room stop moving. Maya Ellison sat at the far end of the polished walnut table, her left hand resting beside a glass of untouched water, her wedding ring catching the cold chandelier light like it still belonged to a life she recognized. Across from her, Caleb Whitmore stood behind his father's chair, tall, handsome, silent, wearing the same navy suit Maya had pressed for him that morning before she knew he had already chosen betrayal over love. Richard leaned back, his silver hair perfect, his expression carved out of money and pride. You had a comfortable life because this family allowed it, he continued. Do not confuse that with ability. Maya felt something tighten in her chest, but she did not look away. She had spent 3 years in that house being introduced as Caleb's wife before anyone ever mentioned her name. She had sat through dinners where men ignored her until they needed a number checked. She had rebuilt Caleb's investor pitch at 2 in the morning, corrected projections that would have embarrassed him in front of the board, and quietly saved deals he later bragged about, as if he had carried them alone. But tonight, in this room with cream walls, imported wine, and people who measured worth by last names, she was being spoken to like a charity case who had forgotten her place. Caleb cleared his throat, but not to defend her. Maya, let's not make this harder than it has to be. The words landed softer than Richard's, but somehow they hurt more. Maya turned to him slowly. Harder for who, Caleb? His jaw flexed. For a second, the man she married flickered in his face, the one who once told her she was the smartest person he knew. Then it disappeared behind fear, pride, and the desperate need to remain his father's son. Richard slid a folder across the table. Divorce papers. Already prepared. Already marked with little yellow tabs where her signature was expected, like this was not the end of a marriage but a routine business exit. Sign it, Richard said. Take the settlement. Start over somewhere realistic. Maya's fingers were cold when she picked up the pen. Her throat burned, but her eyes stayed dry. She signed once. Then again. Each stroke felt like cutting a rope she had mistaken for a lifeline. When she finished, she removed her ring and placed it on top of the papers. The tiny sound it made against the folder was almost nothing, but Caleb flinched like he heard it from across a canyon. Maya stood, smoothing the front of her simple black dress. You are right about one thing, Richard, she said quietly. I will be starting over. He gave a thin smile. Good. Alone is where you will learn the truth. Maya reached for her purse. Inside, behind her wallet, sat a matte black business card from Meridian Capital, the one firm Whitmore Holdings had begged for a meeting with and never gotten. Maya had not called them yet. She had wanted to save her marriage before she saved herself. But that silence was not weakness. As she walked out of the Whitmore dining room, no one at that table understood the woman they had just dismissed. Richard thought he had removed a burden from his family. Caleb thought he had chosen power. But what neither of them knew was that the only person in that room who understood how to keep the Whitmore empire from collapsing had just left with her name, her dignity, and the one connection they would soon need more than air. Maya did not drive away from the Whitmore estate right away. She sat in her car at the end of the long stone driveway with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the iron gate like it had just shut on a version of her that had spent too many years begging to be seen. The house behind her glowed warm through the trees, all golden windows and old money, but inside her chest there was only a quiet kind of cold. Not shock, not even anger yet. Just the heavy ache of realizing that the people she had cooked for, smiled for, prayed for, and protected in rooms they never invited her into had never actually considered her family. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from Caleb. Please do not make this ugly. Maya let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Ugly. That was what he called her pain. Not the papers his father had prepared before dinner. Not the silence he hid behind while she was humiliated. Not the way he watched her take off her ring like he was watching someone else lose a marriage. Maya turned the phone face down and closed her eyes. For a moment, she was not in Connecticut anymore. She was back in Atlanta, 17 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while her mother balanced bills with a pencil and her father taught her how to read a profit and loss statement from his trucking business. Numbers tell stories, baby, her father used to say, tapping the paper with his thumb. People lie when they are scared, proud, or greedy. Numbers do not lie unless somebody makes them. Maya had grown up on that lesson. Her family was not rich, but they were steady. Her mother ran the books for 3 local businesses and still found time to make Sunday dinner. Her father built a small logistics company from one used box truck and a borrowed office behind a tire shop. Maya learned early that dignity did not come from marble floors or last names. It came from keeping your word when no one was clapping for you. Then came the betrayal that nearly ruined her father. A partner he trusted drained accounts, buried debt, and walked away before the company collapsed. Maya watched her father age 10 years in one summer. She watched her mother cry quietly in the laundry room so the children would not hear. And she promised herself she would never be fooled by polished men who smiled while hiding knives and paperwork. That promise carried her through college, through nights working at the campus library, through internships where people assumed she was there to take notes instead of lead the meeting. By 30, Maya had become the woman failing companies called when pride had already failed them. She could walk into a boardroom, read 3 pages of financials, and tell exactly where the bleeding started. Caleb had loved that about her at first. "You make chaos look simple," he told her once, grinning over takeout boxes in her tiny apartment. Back then, she believed admiration and respect were the same thing. She did not know admiration could turn into resentment the moment her light made his shadow too obvious. As Maya finally started the car, the black business card in her purse seemed to weigh more than the wedding ring she had left behind. Richard Whitmore had called her nothing. Caleb had let him. But long before either of them gave her a name at their table, Maya Ellison had already built one of her own. The first time Maya realized Caleb was slipping away, it was not because of perfume on his shirt or a late-night call he rushed to silence. It was because he stopped asking what she thought. For almost 3 years, their marriage had survived on quiet partnership. Caleb would come home from the Whitmore office with his tie loosened and panic hiding behind his smile, and Maya would sit with him at the kitchen island, barefoot in sweatpants, helping him untangle numbers his own team could not explain. She never made him feel small for needing her. That was her mistake. She thought love meant covering the gaps, not realizing some men grow ashamed of the woman who keeps them from falling through. Then Sloan Mercer arrived at the Whitmore Foundation Gala in a silver dress, with camera-ready hair, a champagne laugh, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly whose ego to feed. She was introduced as a branding consultant, but Maya knew within 10 minutes that Sloan was not there for the charity. She watched the woman touch Richard Whitmore lightly on the arm and praise his legacy vision, then turned to Caleb and tell him the company needed a younger face. Caleb stood taller when she said it. That small change hurt more than Maya expected. Later that night, while the ballroom glittered under crystal lights and donors paid $2,500 a plate to feel generous, Caleb pulled Maya aside near the coat check. "Try not to challenge Dad tonight," he said, keeping his voice low. Maya blinked. "I asked one question about the expansion numbers." "You embarrassed him." "No, Caleb. I caught a mistake before the investors did." His face tightened. "You do not understand how my family does business." For a second, Maya could not speak. The sentence sounded rehearsed, like someone had handed it to him and he had decided it fit. Across the room, Sloan lifted her glass toward him with a tiny smile. Maya saw it then. Not the affair, not yet. Something colder. Caleb had found someone willing to admire the version of him that did not need Maya. After that night, the distance grew in quiet, ordinary ways. He took calls in the driveway. He changed passwords they used to share. He stopped leaving drafts on the kitchen counter. When Maya asked if something was wrong, he kissed her forehead and said, "You worry too much." But his kiss had become a receipt, proof that he had performed kindness and expected no more questions. 2 weeks before the divorce dinner, Maya walked past Richard's library and heard her name. The door was open just enough for the voices to carry. Richard said, "She makes you look weak, Caleb. A wife should support the family, not act like she is running it." Caleb was quiet for so long Maya almost stepped away. Then he said, "Maybe the divorce will help me focus." Maya stood there with one hand against the wall, her breath caught somewhere between grief and disbelief. She waited for pain to knock her down. It did not. Something else came instead, sharp and clear. She walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand. Inside was the matte black card from Meridian Capital. She had earned that connection before she ever became Mrs. Whitmore. Her thumb hovered over the number. For years, she had protected Caleb from rooms he was not ready to stand in alone. That night, Maya finally understood the truth. He had not outgrown her. He had mistaken her silence for a shadow and stepped into the dark without her. By the morning of the divorce meeting, Maya had already packed her life into 6 cardboard boxes. Not because she had little, but because she finally understood how much of herself she had left behind in places that never protected her. The boxes sat near the door of the small guest house she had moved into after leaving the Whitmore estate, labeled in black marker with simple words: books, files, kitchen, shoes, photographs, personal. She had written personal on the last one and then stood there for a full minute, staring at it, wondering how a whole marriage could fit inside one word. Caleb arrived at the law office 10 minutes late, wearing a charcoal suit and the tired expression of a man who wanted sympathy for consequences he had chosen. Richard came with him, of course. He walked in first, shook hands with the attorneys, and took the head seat at the conference table as if the divorce belonged to him. Caleb sat beside him. Sloane was not there, but Maya could feel her fingerprints all over the room, in Caleb's new confidence, in the polished cruelty of the settlement, in the way Richard kept looking at Maya like she should be grateful for being dismissed politely. The lawyer pushed a folder toward her. Mrs. Whitmore, the proposed agreement includes a one-time payment, relocation assistance for 90 days, and a confidentiality clause covering all family and business matters. Maya looked down at the papers. 90 days. That was what 3 years of marriage, unpaid strategy work, late-night financial cleanups, public smiling, private swallowing, and quiet loyalty had been reduced to. Caleb leaned forward, softening his voice in a way that once might have worked. Take it, Maya. Please. It will help you start over quietly. She looked at him then, really looked. His face was familiar, but the man behind it felt like a stranger wearing memories that no longer fit. Quietly, she repeated. Caleb swallowed. You know what I mean. Richard sighed, impatient. We are offering more than enough. This does not need to become dramatic. Maya almost smiled at that. Dramatic was the word people used when a woman refused to disappear on command. She opened the folder slowly, scanning each page. Her eyes caught the clause that mattered most. She could never claim advisory involvement in Whitmore Holdings, never disclose that she had reviewed financial documents, never discuss business strategy she had contributed during the marriage. They were not just ending the relationship. They were trying to erase the proof that she had ever mattered. Her hand tightened around the pen, but only for a second. Then she set it down. No, Caleb blinked. No. No settlement. No silence. No agreement that turns my work into your family secret. Richard's face hardened. You are making a mistake. Maya gathered her purse and stood. I already made one. I married into a family that thought my grace was permission. The room went still. Caleb looked at her like he wanted to say something, but once again, nothing came. Maya walked out before the attorneys could call her back. Outside, cold air brushed her face, clean and sharp. At the curb, a black Lincoln waited with the engine running. The rear window lowered, and a woman in a navy blazer leaned slightly forward. Maya Ellison? She asked. Meridian Capital has been expecting your call. Maya looked back at the glass doors of the law office, where Caleb now stood frozen behind his reflection. For the first time in weeks, her hands were steady. They thought the divorce had left her with nothing. They had no idea it had finally returned her to herself. 5 years can bury a name, but they cannot bury what a woman becomes after she stops asking the wrong people to see her. Maya Ellison did not rebuild herself with speeches or revenge fantasies. She rebuilt herself in early flights, hotel coffee, conference rooms with bad lighting, and 12-hour days where failing companies handed her their worst numbers and waited to see if she would flinch. She never did. Meridian Capital had opened the door, but Maya was the one who walked through it, and kept walking until people who once looked past her started clearing their calendars when her assistant called. By 40, she was managing partner at Ellison Meridian Group, the kind of turnaround firm banks whispered about when a family business was too proud to admit it was bleeding. She did not chase headlines. She preferred clean books, honest payroll, and saving companies before ego finished destroying them. Her office in Midtown was not flashy, just glass walls, framed photographs of Atlanta, and a small brass nameplate on her desk that read Maya Ellison, not Maya Whitmore, not Mrs. Anyone. Every morning, that name greeted her before the world did. Across town, Whitmore Holdings was dying in expensive clothing. The lobby still smelled like fresh lilies, the elevators still shined, and Richard's portrait still hung near the executive floor. But behind the polished stone and careful smiles, the company was cracking. Caleb had been handed power too early and questioned too rarely. He expanded into luxury hotel projects nobody had properly researched, signed supplier contracts with penalties buried so deep his legal team missed them, and approved a branding overhaul Sloan swore would make the company feel modern. It made them look desperate. Sloan, now his fiancée, moved through Whitmore events like she owned the room, but she did not understand the business beyond the parts that photographed well. She knew how to choose flowers for a donor dinner. She did not know how to read a cash flow problem until vendors started calling twice a day. One gray Tuesday morning, the Whitmore boardroom felt colder than usual. Richard sat at the head of the table, thinner now, his silver hair still perfect, his hand wrapped around a coffee cup he had not touched. Caleb stood near the screen, explaining another delay in refinancing, using words like temporary pressure and market correction. The chief financial officer, a quiet man named Howard Price, finally closed his folder. "It is not temporary, Caleb." The room went still. Howard placed a report on the table. "The banks are tightening. 3 lenders want revised guarantees by Friday. Payroll is safe for now, but not for long. If we do not bring in outside restructuring support, we will lose control of the process." Richard's jaw tightened. "We are Whitmore Holdings. We do not hand our company to outsiders." Howard looked at him with the exhausted courage of a man who had waited too long to tell the truth. "Sir, the outsiders are already circling. The question is whether we invite someone who can save us before the creditors choose someone who will carve us up." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "Fine. Give me names." Howard did not move. "There is one name." He slid a slim folder across the table. Caleb opened it, and the color drained from his face before he said a word. On the first page, beneath the Ellison Meridian logo, was a professional photograph of Maya, calm-eyed and unshaken, followed by a list of companies she had pulled back from collapse. Richard reached for the folder, impatient at first, then slower as he read. For once, no one in the room tried to soften the truth. The woman they had dismissed as nothing had become the person banks trusted more than the Whitmore name itself. Caleb stared at Maya's photograph like it was a door he had slammed years ago, only to find himself locked outside it now. And for the first time in his life, Richard Whitmore understood that pride could be more expensive than debt. Richard Whitmore waited until the boardroom emptied before he touched the folder again. For nearly an hour, it had sat in front of him like an accusation, Maya's name printed in clean black letters above a career he had never bothered to imagine. He had spent his whole life believing power meant people came to him. Bankers returned his calls. Politicians smiled too long at his fundraisers. Young executives laughed at jokes that were not funny. But now the room was quiet. The city was turning gray beyond the windows, and the only person who could keep his family company from being pulled apart was the woman he had once dismissed at his own dinner table. Caleb stood near the door, restless, ashamed, and still proud enough to be useless. "Dad, maybe Howard is overreacting," he said. Richard looked up slowly. "Howard has been cleaning up your optimism for 2 years." Caleb's face tightened. "That is not fair. Neither is insolvency." The words cut through the room with the coldness Richard usually saved for other people. Caleb looked down, and for once, Richard saw not a son being challenged, but a man who had been protected too long from the weight of his own decisions. On the desk, Richard's phone sat beside a crystal paperweight and an old photograph of the Whitmore factory in Ohio, back when the company made things people could hold, before everything became acquisitions, branding, and borrowed confidence. He reached for the phone, then stopped. Pride had a strange physical weight. It sat in his wrist, in his throat, in the silence before a number he did not want to dial. "You want me to call her?" Caleb asked quietly. Richard almost laughed. "You think she would answer you?" Caleb flinched, and maybe he deserved to. Richard found the number through Howard's contact sheet. His thumb hovered over it. 5 years ago, he had watched Maya walk out of his house with a purse, a black dress, and a level of calm he mistook for defeat. He remembered the ring on the folder. He remembered telling her she would learn the truth alone. Now the truth had come back wearing her name. The line rang 3 times. Then a woman answered with a steady voice. "This is Maya Ellison." Richard straightened in his chair out of habit, even though she could not see him. "Maya, This is Richard Whitmore. There was a pause. Not startled, not emotional, just long enough to remind him that his name no longer opened every door. I know who it is. Caleb turned away toward the window. Richard forced his voice into the old rhythm, polished and controlled. Whitmore Holdings is exploring temporary strategic support. Your firm came recommended. Another pause. This one felt sharper. Richard. Her voice was calm, but there was no softness in it. I do not have time for theater. The words landed harder than he expected. He looked at the report again, at the numbers, the debt, the deadlines circled in red. For the first time in decades, Richard Whitmore told the truth without dressing it in status. We need you. The office seemed to hold its breath. On the other end, Maya did not laugh. She did not remind him right away. That restraint made it worse. I built a life after your family made sure I left with nothing but my name, she said. So before we discuss your company, you should understand something. I am not coming back as Caleb's ex-wife. I am not coming back as someone you once allowed at your table. If I walk into that building, I walk in as the person your board called because they trust my judgment more than yours. Richard closed his eyes for half a second. Caleb turned from the window, pale and silent. Understood, Richard said, and the word tasted unfamiliar. Maya's voice stayed even. Send the full books. Not the pretty version. The real one. Debt schedules, vendor contracts, lender notices, executive compensation, and every deal Caleb signed in the last 36 months. Caleb's head snapped up. Richard did not look at him. You will have them tonight. Good, Maya said. And Richard? He gripped the edge of the desk. Yes. I did succeed alone. That is why you are calling. Then the line went quiet, and Richard sat there with the phone still pressed to his ear, understanding too late that some debts never appear on a balance sheet until the person you owe becomes the only one who can save you. The next morning, the Whitmore boardroom looked exactly the way Maya remembered it, which made the moment feel even colder. Same long glass table. Same view of Manhattan rising behind the windows. Same leather chairs filled with men who once smiled over her head like she was part of the furniture. The only difference was that this time, nobody asked if she wanted coffee in the tone people used for assistance. They stood when she walked in. Not all at once, and not gracefully, but they stood. Maya wore a cream suit, simple gold earrings, and carried one slim laptop bag. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. Just a calm woman walking into a room that had spent years pretending she was not dangerous. Richard stood at the head of the table, his face pulled tight with exhaustion. Thank you for coming, Maya. She looked at him for half a second. I am here for the company, Richard, not for nostalgia. Caleb was seated halfway down the table, his hands folded too neatly in front of him. Sloane sat beside him in a pale blue designer dress, looking polished and irritated, like Maya's presence had ruined the picture she had arranged in her mind. She gave a small smile. It is good to see you again, Maya. I hope this will stay professional. Maya set her bag on the table and opened her laptop. That depends on how honest everyone wants to be. The room went still. Howard Price connected her laptop to the screen, and within seconds, the first slide appeared. Not a logo, not a mission statement. Numbers. Hard, clean, unforgiving numbers. Maya did not perform. She simply walked them through the truth. The hotel expansion in Nashville was over budget by $18 million. The luxury rebrand had burned through almost 3 times its approved marketing spend. Vendor payments were being delayed in a pattern that suggested cash was worse than reported. 2 of Caleb's supplier contracts carried penalty clauses that could trigger if lenders demanded restructuring. Each detail landed quietly, but the silence grew heavier with every sentence. Caleb shifted in his chair. Some of those decisions were based on market projections available at the time. Maya turned to him. No. Some of those decisions were based on optimism dressed up as strategy. A few board members looked down. Richard did not move. Maya clicked to the next slide. And then there is Mercer Creative. Sloane's smile vanished. The screen filled with invoices, consulting fees, rush charges, vendor referrals, and side agreements routed through companies with different names but the same mailing address. Maya's voice stayed level. Whitmore Holdings paid Mercer Creative $7.4 million in 18 months. During that same period, vendors connected to Ms. Mercer received preferred contracts without competitive review. Sloane sat up. That is a serious accusation. It is a serious pattern, Maya said. The accusation comes after forensic accounting. Caleb looked at Sloane, and for the first time, doubt entered his face without Maya having to say another word. That was the thing about truth. When it finally entered a room, it did not need to shout. Richard pressed his fingers against the table, his pride fighting for somewhere to stand. Can the company be saved? Maya closed the presentation. For a moment, she let the question breathe. Years ago, this same family had asked her to leave quietly. Now every person in the room was waiting for her to speak. She looked at Richard, then Caleb, then the board. Yes, she said. Relief started to move through the room, but Maya lifted one hand and stopped it before it became comfort. But not under the current leadership structure. Caleb's face tightened. Meaning what? Maya slid a printed proposal across the table. Meaning if Ellison Meridian takes this on, we take control of the restructuring. Full access. Full authority. No hidden books. No family veto. No cosmetic fixes. Richard stared at the proposal as if it had weight. And what do you want from us? Maya met his eyes, steady and unshaken. Control. The word sat in the boardroom like a glass dropped on marble. Control. Nobody moved for a few seconds, not because they did not understand Maya, but because they understood her perfectly. Richard stared at the proposal while the color in his face shifted from anger to something quieter, something closer to humiliation. Caleb reached for the packet and flipped through the pages too fast, as if the terms might change if he looked at them with enough disbelief. You want Dad to step down as chairman, he said. Maya stood beside the screen, hands relaxed at her sides. Temporarily during restructuring. You want my voting authority suspended. During restructuring. Caleb let out a bitter laugh. That is convenient. Maya looked at him, calm as ever. No, Caleb. Convenient was letting me fix your projections at midnight, and then letting your father call me nothing at dinner. The room went silent again. Not awkward. Accountable. Sloane pushed her chair back slightly. This is personal. Everyone can see that. Maya turned to her for the first time since the meeting began. Personal is using a family company as a private shopping cart and calling it brand strategy. Professional is proving it with invoices. Sloane's mouth opened, then closed. Howard looked down at his notes, but Maya could see the corner of his mouth tighten, not with amusement, but relief. Someone had finally said what everyone else had been too afraid to put on the table. Richard cleared his throat. If we agree to this, what happens to the investigation into Mercer Creative? Sloane's eyes snapped toward him. Richard. He did not look at her. Maya answered. It moves forward. Quietly, legally, and fully documented. If there was no conflict of interest, the records will show that. Caleb turned to Sloane, waiting for reassurance. She gave him a wounded look, the kind of look that had probably worked on him in easier rooms. But this room had numbers on the screen, Linders at the door, and Maya Ellison standing where denial used to live. Richard picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. 5 years earlier, he had slid divorce papers toward Maya like he was removing a stain from the family table. Now the paper in front of him removed him from power, and the woman he had dismissed was waiting, not smiling, not gloating, just steady. That steadiness made him feel smaller than anger ever could. Caleb stood suddenly. Maya, can we talk outside? She considered refusing, then nodded once. In the hallway, away from the board's eyes, Caleb's composure cracked. You are enjoying this. Maya looked at the man she once loved and felt the sadness of it more than the anger. No, I am tired. You are taking my company. I am saving the company. There is a difference. He lowered his voice. You could have warned me. Maya almost laughed, but the sound never came out. I warned you for years. You called it criticism. Caleb looked away, and for a moment, the hallway felt crowded with every version of them that had failed. I am sorry, he said. The words were small, almost careful, like he was afraid they would cost him. Maya studied his face. Once, those words would have undone her. Once, she would have reached for his hand and helped him turn shame into hope. But she was no longer living inside the hunger to be chosen. I believe you are sorry now, she said. But sorry after the damage is not repair. It is recognition. When they returned, Richard had signed. The pen lay beside the papers, and his hand rested flat on the table as if he needed it there to keep himself upright. Maya took the agreement, checked the signatures, and placed it in her folder. For one quiet second, the room belonged to her. Then Howard's phone buzzed. He read the message, and his face changed. Maya, he said carefully. There is another issue. Caleb went still. Maya turned toward him before Howard finished. What issue? Howard looked at Caleb, then back at the table. A personal guarantee. $42 million. It was not in the main debt schedule. Maya's eyes settled on Caleb, and this time, his silence answered before he did. The company could still be saved, but the man who had hidden behind his father had just dragged one more secret into the light. For the first time since Maya walked back into Whitmore Holdings, Caleb looked less like a man protecting his pride and more like a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. The $42 million personal guarantee had been signed during the Nashville expansion, buried under a side agreement with a private lender who cared nothing about the Whitmore name and everything about collecting. Richard read the document with a face so still it looked almost carved. You signed this without telling the board? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no clean answer. No polished sentence. No father to stand in front of him this time. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out, he said. Maya looked at him, and for a moment, she saw the old Caleb clearly. Not the charming man from the gala. Not the silent husband at the dinner table. Just a boy raised to believe failure was shameful, so he hid it until it became a disaster. That is the problem with pride, she said softly. It always thinks secrecy is strategy. Nobody argued. Over the next 6 months, Maya did what she had come to do. She did not save Whitmore Holdings with a miracle. She saved it with long days, ugly meetings, honest cuts, and decisions no one had been brave enough to make. She sold the Nashville project before it swallowed the company whole. She renegotiated vendor contracts. She protected payroll at the Ohio factory because 400 families should not have to pay for one family's arrogance. Mercer Creative was removed from every account, and when the investigation finished, Sloan disappeared from the Whitmore social circle as quickly as she had entered it. Richard stepped down as chairman, not in a grand speech, not with applause, but with a short letter to the board and a silence that said more than his pride ever had. Caleb remained with the company, but not at the top. Maya placed him under a new operations chief, a woman from Detroit who had no interest in flattering him and every interest in making him learn the work he once pretended to understand. The public announcement came on a clear Thursday afternoon in front of the restored Whitmore factory. Reporters stood behind a thin rope line. Workers gathered near the entrance in steel-toed boots and company jackets. Richard took the microphone first. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice held. This company survived because Maya Ellison told us the truth when we were too proud to hear it. I was wrong about her. Completely wrong. Maya stood a few feet away, steady in a dark green coat, the wind moving gently through her hair. She did not need his apology to become whole, but she accepted the truth because truth, spoken late, can still matter to the people who hear it. After the cameras left, Caleb found her near the parking lot, where the afternoon sun stretched across the pavement. Would you get coffee with me sometime? He asked. His voice was careful, almost humble. Maya looked at him for a long second. Once, that question would have opened a door inside her. Now it only reminded her how peaceful it felt not to wait beside one. No, Caleb, she said, not unkindly. I hope you become the kind of man who does not need a woman to save him before he respects her. But I am not coming back to teach you that. His eyes lowered, and this time, she did not rescue him from the discomfort. She had spent too much of her life translating other people's shame into something easier for them to carry. Maya walked to her car with no ring on her finger and no bitterness in her chest. Behind her stood a company she had saved, a family that had finally learned her value, and a man who understood too late that losing someone is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is a woman choosing herself so completely that the people who once dismissed her can no longer reach the version of her they broke. And maybe that was the lesson worth carrying. Never let someone convince you that your worth begins with their approval. The right people will see your light. The wrong people will need darkness to understand what they lost.